What's going on, everyone? Today we're going to be doing an artifact guide, and we're going to be doing basically we're going to answer all the most common questions in terms of how do you know if you have a good artifact, what's the best artifact domain to farm for, how do I get better artifacts, how do I know when to upgrade an artifact, how do I build so many characters. You've got so many characters built. I have over 27, 28 characters built in this game with their own individual artifact set, and I do not have crazy luck. This is something you can have too. I do get the battle pass, but you know that's only so many fragile resin, right? It's not really all that different. Just from playing the game for I think it's been a year and a half now, I have 27 characters built, and so you can have a lot of characters built, really well built characters. I 36 star the Abyss so many times in every rotation. You can too. It's really not that hard. But we're gonna start off with the question I always get, which is what is the best artifact domain to farm in? What's the best artifact set? What's the best domain to farm in? I think the best domain that you could farm, it's a little bit different from what most people would say. Most people would tell you that it's the Emblem of Severed Fate and Shimenawa's Reminiscence domain. I would actually say the most resin efficient you could be is the Deepwood Memories and the Gilded Dreams. And that's basically just because so many characters can use the Gilded Dreams or the Deepwood Memories artifact set. Deepwood Memories is best in slot on every Dendro team. Dendro is one of the best teams in the game. You're going to need a lot of these pieces, maybe a set for each side. And then this one is a very general use set that can be used on so many characters. You can use it, you know, I have it on Tainari and a 2-piece on Nilou, but you can use it on Hu Tao, you can use it on Yaimiko, Fischl, a whole bunch of characters that I'm not thinking of right now. You can use it on Ganyu. There's so many characters that can use the Gilded Dream set pretty well, and it's just a very efficient set to farm. It's not always the best in slot, but it's very efficient. But it is the best slot for quite a number of characters. The next most efficient set is the Emblem of Severed Fates and the Shimenawa's Reminiscence set. The reason this set falls behind for me is the Shimenawa's, although it's somewhat universal, I don't really like using it on all that many characters. I like using it on Yoimiya because Yoimiya's burst is not very good, but other than that, it takes away and restricts your team build, it restricts how you play your character. Losing elemental area, for me, it's just me, right? Elemental bursts are the most fun part of the game for me, seeing that big flashy animation, doing all that damage of that special effect, and this set restricts my usage of that feature, so I don't really like it. It's not fun, there's usually better alternatives, or just as good alternatives to the Shimenawas, so I don't personally like it that much. But you're probably going to have to spend a lot of time in both of those domains regardless. As you can see, I've spent a lot of time in the Emblem domain for lots of these characters, who it is the best in slot for a ton of characters. So if you think this is the best artifact set, you know, that's totally fine. That's totally fine. It's a totally valid opinion, right? And then what you'll want to do is farm both of these artifact sets until you've geared up the characters that you need. You know, check kachingmains.com. They have the best guides for for pretty much all characters, unless they're super recent, and then find out what their best artifact set is. Farm that artifact set for any character that's not using basically one of these two domains. You're going to want to strongbox them. You don't really want to farm very many other domains other than these two, in my opinion. There's really just not very many that you should farm. The only ones I can kind of think of is if you have an Ito, you can farm the Husk of Opulent Dreams domain. And then if you have, maybe Eula, you want to farm the Pale Flame domain. But other than that, if you're really dedicated to those characters, other than that, you want to stick to these two domains and then use the Artifact Strongbox exchange system. It's not a scam. It's the best thing that Genshin Impact has ever done for quality of life. And so that is the answer to that. So moving on, before we get into how do you know what artifact is actually good, how do you know if you have a good artifact, if you keep upgrading it, before we get into that, because that's a really important question, we're just going to go a basic once over on main stats, substats, because those are really important to understand to know if your artifact is good. So looking at main stats, for your flower, your main stat is always going to be HP. You can't choose that. It's always going to be HP. So the only thing you're going to be concerned of for your flower is the substats. The main stat doesn't matter at all. It's for the flower. It's always going to be the same. For a feather, it's always going to be attack percent, or not attack percent, flat attack is always going to be the main stat of a feather. And then you're going to just look at the substats, right? For a sands can be energy recharge, attack percent, defense percent, elemental mastery. I'm not going to name them all, but it can be quite a wide variety of things. And most characters are going to want either attack percent, elemental mastery, energy recharge. Some of them want HP, some of them want defense. but you're going to want to, again, check Kaching mains for your specific character on what main stat your artifact, your character wants. The next one is the Goblet. The Goblet is the artifact that has the most variance. And this is going to be important for when we're looking at whether an artifact is good or not, because most characters are going to want an elemental damage bonus Goblet, because elemental damage bonus is a stat that can only, for most characters, can only be achieved through the Goblet. They have very few ways of increasing our elemental damage bonus in Genshin Impact. Some characters, including Yelan, give you elemental damage bonus. Alhaitham, through his Ascension stat, buffs his own elemental damage bonus. Raiden has a bit of elemental damage bonus through her conversion from energy recharge, but for most characters, the only place they're going to get that stat is through the Goblet. So it's often going to be what's called your off piece, which if you're trying to get a 4-piece set, the Goblet is usually the rarest, and so it'll often be the piece that doesn't match with the 4-piece set. And then the hat, or the headpiece, is usually you're going to want it to be either critical rate or critical damage, again depending on the character. A character like Shenhe wants attack percent, but most damage dealing characters, Kuki wants elemental mastery, most damage dealing characters are going to want crit rate or crit damage. So that's a rundown of the main stats, and then getting into and then substats. So you cannot have a stat like elemental damage bonus in your substats. You can have attack, flat attack percent, flat attack, critical rate, critical damage, energy recharge, elemental mastery, flat defense, and defense percent. And so different characters want different substats. And so what you're trying to achieve throughout building your character is something called artifact balance, at least I like to call it. And artifact balance is basically, you don't want to have too much of one stat and not enough of other stats that your character uses. So for example, Raiden Shogun, she's notoriously one of the hardest characters to build because it's hard to achieve artifact balance with Raiden Shogun. You're trying to achieve a decent amount of attack with a lot of energy recharge, with a good critical rate to critical damage ratio. If you think about certain stats, they give you more value especially up to a certain point, and depending on how many other stats you have. So it's not quite diminishing returns, but it's kind of like diminishing returns. So if you have so much attack, if you just run attack percent on everything, the more attack percent you have, the less valuable it is, because it's going to be a lower percentage increase from the previous one. But just know that you want to have a balance. You want to have what's called a 2-to-1 critical rate to critical damage ratio. I know this actually happened to be pretty much exactly 2-to-1. That doesn't usually happen, right? So for example, I just finished farming my Diluc, and I'm trying to achieve artifact balance on Diluc, right? He has a pretty solid critical rate to critical damage. It's not quite 1-to-2, right? Ideally, I would have a little bit less critical rate, a little bit more critical damage, but he also wants elemental mastery. I would much prefer to have 150 to 200 elemental mastery, but I just haven't been able to get a good elemental mastery sans. This is the best I've had. My Hu Tao has a bit better because she's running the pretty close to a 1-to-2 ratio of crit rate to crit damage, and she has elemental mastery, and she also wants 150 to 200 elemental mastery, and with the 4-piece bonus from the Gilded Dream set, she's going to have that much elemental mastery. So that's what you're trying to look for. When you're looking at each of your stats, you say, okay, I've looked at the Keqing Main's guide. I know I want elemental mastery on my character. I know I want attack. I know I want crit rate, crit damage, those types of things. So I'm going to look for pieces that have those types of substats. So if I go down here to my level 0 pieces, I can see, okay, this one has critical rate, it has attack percent, it has HP percent. I'm maybe building a Ganyu. I've got 2 good stats and 1 not so good stat. I'm going to take this artifact and I'm going to upgrade it to level 4 and see if the final stat ends up being something useful, if it ends up being elemental mastery or critical damage. A lot of people, if it's not double crit, they won't upgrade it. I don't agree with that. Sometimes you're not gonna be able to get double crit. If you look at a piece like this, not like that. If you look at a piece like this one, this is a fantastic piece. It has a solid amount of critical damage. It has a solid amount of attack percent, solid amount of energy recharge, and elemental mastery, which Beidou doesn't need as much. But that's about 2 rolls of elemental mastery. And so on the whole, this is a pretty good artifact for Beidou. If we look at this piece, you know, critical rate 14.4%. You know, that's what people call 28.8 crit value, which is basically you double the crit rate and add the crit damage, and that tells you the crit value for your artifact. And then it has a roll of energy recharge. Basically, we have a missed roll. We have flat attack, which is not as good, but it's still pretty. It's about two flat attack rolls is about as good as one attack percent roll. So this is basically one missed stat and then two missed stats for defense. So this is actually a really good artifact. And a lot of people would think this is trash, but this is actually a really good artifact. And so if you don't understand useful stats, then you're really going to miss out on a lot of good artifacts. And sometimes, you know, for example, for my Xiangling, the reason why that artifact is so good for her is because she's a little bit low on her crit rate. If we look at my Xiangling stats, she's a little bit low on her crit rate. So having a piece that gives me 14.4% crit rate is super, super valuable, because then with the catch, I'm at 55%. It's still a little bit low, but it's good enough. It's very much good enough. And quite a bit of crit damage because I'm running a crit damage mask, a ton of EM because I'm running an Elemental Mastery Sands. And so this Xiangling is actually pretty well built. A lot of people will disregard artifacts that are solid, that you could easily 36-star the Abyss. Like, this is not a crazy artifact, but it's got ER, which she really needs, crit damage, which she really needs. The Feather, again, 14.4% crit rate, attack percent, another one. This is an insane piece. 2 rolls of attack percent, a bunch of critical rate, Elemental Mastery, and only 1 wasted roll. This is a really insane piece, and some people wouldn't even upgrade this because it's not a double crit. Yes, you do need crit rate, crit damage. For Yelan, 70, 72, 149, yes, I want this crit rate, but at the end of the day, you know, some people would look at, you know, this piece and they wouldn't upgrade it. But look at this, it has HP, energy recharge, flat HP, crit damage. This is a perfect piece for Yelan. Like, obviously flat HP isn't as good, but I say this just to say, you know, you never know with an artifact. And like, look at this one. Let's see, where is it on my Ayaka? 37.3% critical damage. Some people wouldn't even upgrade this. Again, it's finding artifact balance. I would say, how do you know when your character is built artifact wise? It depends on how much they use other stats. So for me, for my best characters, I like to have a 200 crit value on their stat page. So this is 130. You double the crit rate, which is 130, and add the crit damage, which is 220. So I'm 20 crit value above where I would consider, you know, for my standard of a really solid build. I know some people would call that an average build. Some people would call that a good build for 200 crit value. That's what I look for. So I look for 200 crit value and enough of the other stats they need. You really want to prioritize energy recharge. If your characters need their burst, you want to have enough energy recharge that you're never short on your burst, because you could have all the crit rate and crit damage in the world, but if you don't have enough energy recharge, you're not going to be able to use it. So you want to have enough energy recharge. For my Nahida, I've got 21 elemental mastery. I would prefer to have more. I'll get a bit more when I 90 my weapon, but she has a pretty reasonable crit rate. It's a little bit high on the crit rate, a little bit low on the crit damage. I'm trying to have a balance on my Nahida, you know. So for example, she doesn't have, well, it's actually pretty close to the 200 crit value. The biggest thing is your artifacts are unique to you. You know, no one else is going to have your exact artifact, so you're going to be upgrading artifact that you think that you need, right? You're not always going to have pieces that end up obviously good, like this one. Like, this one's obviously good. But what makes you really good at artifact farming, how you can separate yourself and farm more characters faster and have more characters and more teams built more efficiently, is recognizing a sort of hidden gem. Like this artifact is not that great, but it's good enough to complete my build for a character that I'm not focused on min-maxing. My Xingqiu, he really needs that little bit of extra crit rate, right? So obviously, do I want more crit damage? Of course, but this is a fine build for a Xingqiu, right? It's actually not bad at all, especially a little bit of ER. I usually use him with, you know, an ER weapon. I really need to 90 that. Hopefully that gives you at least some idea. There's no definitive answer. It's almost an art when you keep leveling up an artifact. This piece is obviously just perfect. It has all the stats that I need. You know, this piece obviously had those stats, but you know, something like this, it only has 2 usable stats and it's not that good, but it's the best I have though. Sometimes you're gonna end up with pieces like that, and that's okay. The final thing I want to talk about for this video is, you know, don't over farm, right? Don't over farm. Don't farm for so long in one domain to get an upgrade. Like for me to upgrade my Raiden is gonna be very hard to do. This feather is really good. This flower is really good. The sands, I could get an upgrade. The goblet, I'm probably not gonna ever see a better goblet than this one for a long time. This is a really solid mask with two rolls here and here. Like it's gonna be really hard to upgrade. You've seen I've farmed a lot in this domain. Raiden's my favorite character, right? One day I'll passively get an upgraded off piece because this is not really all that good. I don't have any good energy recharge sands on any of my characters in, you know, out of all the farming I've done, I've never had a really good ER sands. That happens sometimes, right? Don't over farm. Don't farm for so long for one character that you end up neglecting the rest of your characters just to min-max, get that perfect character. The perfect artifact doesn't exist. The perfect character doesn't exist. If you've got a solid ratio, if you've got, you know, 200 crit value, your energy recharge has enough, you have the other stats you need, you have some EM, you have some attack, whatever, your artifact is balanced, stop, move on to another character. And that will allow you, it will free you up to build so many more characters. And for those of you who keep building your talents, who keep, you know, leveling up, level 90ing so many characters and crowning so many talents and, you know, not using resonant artifacts, don't be afraid of artifacts. They're not so bad. You can 36 star the game with, you know, kind of copium, not that great artifacts. It's really, you don't need that high of standards. Like, you can just look at some of these pieces. They're not that crazy. This is a good piece, but you know, most of them are not really that insane, right? Some of them are good, but a lot of them really aren't, you know, all that. This piece is awesome, but a lot of them aren't that good, right? This is my Hu Tao goblet. A lot of people wouldn't even touch this with a 10-foot pole, but it's actually a really good goblet. She gets a lot of value from HP and crit rate. I prefer EM on there a little bit, but you know, what can you do? So don't be afraid to farm artifacts. You know, don't over farm in one domain. Don't spend too long just min-maxing one character. And you know, hopefully that tips on you know, making a balanced character was helpful, and just the mindset of building a character. If you want to see more of my builds, if you have any questions about artifact farming, maybe we'll do AMA, you know, for artifact farming, and I'll do a follow-up video. Any questions you have on how to, you know, what the heck is going on with artifacts? It took me months to learn about artifacts and figure out how this really worked, but when I did, you know, it changed the game. So if you have questions, leave them in the comments, and maybe we'll do another video talking about the answers. So all the best, and talk to you soon.